This podcast is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. What if comparing car insurance rates was as easy as putting on your favorite podcast? With Progressive, it is. Just visit the Progressive website to quote with all the coverages you want. You'll see Progressive's direct rate, and then their tool will provide options from other companies, so you can compare. All you need to do is choose the rate and coverage you like. Quote today at Progressive.com to join the over 29 million drivers who trust Progressive. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Comparison rates not available in all states or situations. Prices vary based on how you buy.
This episode is brought to you by Shopify. Whether you're selling a little or a lot, Shopify helps you do your thing, however you cha-ching. From the launch your online shop stage, all the way to the we just hit 1 million orders stage. No matter what stage you're in, Shopify's there to help you grow. Sign up for a $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/special offer, all lowercase. That's shopify.com/special offer.
Dr. Stacy Seyb didn't really want to get on the phone with me late last week. He was definitely out of the office. But lucky for me, he returned our calls anyway. Hey, how are you doing?
Fairly good. I'm kind of, on a family vacation down in on the Texas Gulf. So getting away from the real world a little bit,
Real world's calling, sorry.
Yeah, no, I know.
I wanted to talk to Dr. Seyb because he's become something of a go-to voice when it comes to abortion restrictions in Idaho. And there are a whole lot of those.
This morning, doctors in Idaho could face criminal charges for performing an abortion in almost all cases, and that includes emergency room doctors. Here's why.
Dr. Seyb is a high-risk OBGYN, the guy who often has to break the news to a pregnant person in a medical crisis that abortion isn't really an option for her.
Joining us now is Dr. Stacy Seyb, an obstetrician, gynecologist, and maternal-fetal medicine specialist at St. Luke's Health System in Boise, Idaho. Doctor, we appreciate your time, and I want to start...
Dr. Seyb actually offered testimony as part of the abortion case the Supreme Court weighed in on last week. The court was deciding if a ban that only allows abortion when a patient is at risk of death conflicts with EMTALA, a federal law that requires hospitals to provide stabilizing medical care to all patients.
What we're trying to do is try to figure out the types of things that we can treat as physicians.
The Supreme Court had been asked to decide whether an abortion ban in Idaho allowed for women to get abortions if their health was at risk. But in the end, the ruling here wasn't actually a decision. They simply sent the case back down to the lower courts.
Yeah, no, I don't know if you call that a punt or what you call that in medical terms. I don't understand why it took so long for them to decide whether or not this was something that they would actually take up.
What does this ruling mean for women in your state? Do you even really know?
No, I don't think I really do.
Dr. Seyb does feel a little relief. At least for the moment, there's a temporary stay on Idaho's abortion ban. But that just means some other court is going to weigh in, and they'll weigh in soon.
This decision seemed like an obvious compromise to me. The liberal and conservative justices joined forces and basically said, let's agree to just not take this case up, just drop it. The New York Times characterized it as a win, however muted, for abortion rights. Does it feel like a win to you?
Not really. It feels like it's a positive, but it doesn't feel like a win.
Today on the show, what the Supreme Court's latest decision on abortion looks like from Idaho. I'm Mary Harris. You're listening to What Next? Stick around. This episode is brought to you by Washington Wise. Decisions made in Washington affect your portfolio every day. But what policy changes should investors be watching? Listen to Washington Wise, an original podcast for investors from Charles Schwab, to hear stories making news right now. Host Mike Townsend, Charles Schwab's managing director for legislative and regulatory affairs,
takes a nonpartisan look at the stories that matter most to investors, including the policy initiatives for retirement savings, taxes and trade, inflation fears, the Federal Reserve, and how regulatory developments can affect companies, sectors, and even the entire market. Mike and his guests offer their perspective on how policy changes could affect what you do with your portfolio. Download the latest episode and follow at schwab.com/WashingtonWise or wherever you listen. This show is brought to you by Discover. Have you heard about Doublenomics? It's okay if you haven't. It's extremely niche and practiced by Discover. Here's an example. Discover automatically doubles the cash back earned on your credit card at the end of your first year with Cashback Match. That means with Discover, you could turn $150 cash back into $300. It pays to Discover. See terms at discover.com/creditcard. I first spoke to Dr. Stacy Seyb a few weeks back when he was still waiting for the justices in Washington to come to a decision. As a maternal-fetal medicine specialist, Dr. Seyb focuses on high-risk pregnancy. That means he's generally only called in when something's going wrong, either a potential health risk for the mother or some kind of abnormality with the baby.
Well, certainly there's a lot of diabetes and hypertension, preeclampsia, growth restriction, babies with everything from a club foot to severe chromosome abnormalities, that might not be survivable, so to speak.
Yeah. How often was abortion part of the treatment you provided before the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade?
I would say a few times a month. And our practice, as busy as it is, we pretty much, when it comes to termination, it's pretty limited to, these types of medical issues, terminating either to protect mom or, a very lethal abnormality.
Yeah, imagine if they're coming to you, a maternal-fetal medicine specialist. It's a wanted pregnancy.
Oh, yeah. Yes, I would say it's very wanted. And as I say, I don't think I've ever sat down with a woman who didn't really think twice about her decision.
Can you take me inside one of those conversations that you had before Idaho had a ban in place where something was wrong or you felt like abortion was a reasonable option for a woman? What were those conversations like?
It has to be a very straightforward conversation. Hey, I've got bad news, and you just can't beat around the bush. And I think people appreciate you being straightforward, not candy coating it. What we would do is talk about, what to expect and try to help people understand what they might be up against. Truthfully, probably lethal conditions, like maybe anencephaly.
That's when there's no brain?
Exactly. And, that's a pretty straightforward decision. I think the tougher decisions are the types of things that a child might be, have profound special needs. Those are tough on families. And not everybody has the resources to take care of a baby like that. And sometimes people don't want to talk, but I think the biggest thing is we just try to reassure them that our practice is about education and supporting whatever decisions they might have.
These kinds of conversations changed in 2022 when the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade. Idaho, where Dr. Seyb works, had a trigger law in place, which meant a near total abortion ban went into effect right away. The ban's got very limited health exceptions, allowing abortions only when it's necessary to prevent the death of a pregnant woman. Doctors could lose their medical licenses for violating this law, even go to jail. That means that Dr. Seyb is generally no longer allowed to perform abortions for severe abnormalities like anencephaly, or even in cases where a patient is having a medical emergency, but isn't immediately at risk of death.
Probably one of the most common conditions is early rupture of the membranes, 18, 20 weeks.
So a woman's water breaks, and then you get a call on your cell phone saying, could you come down to the hospital?
Yeah. Would you consult and help us with this? Typically, we wouldn't have ever even been called in, but I think we are called many times because providers don't know what to do. The biggest enemy in ruptured membranes is infection. And, that's one of the things that we try to prevent because, infection can progress to sepsis and, organ failure and even death. We are pretty good at maybe pulling people back from the brink of death, but medicine is effective when it's utilized in somewhat of a proactive manner. We know the chance of the pregnancy, someone having a take-home baby after a pregnancy that's had early ruptured membranes is small.
How small?
I think it's 10 or 20% at the most. And in the meantime, women who continue the pregnancy, about 60% of them will end up with some sort of morbidity, whether that's an infection or heavy bleeding or something like that.
They'll get sick.
They will get sick. Yes, that's 60%. Whereas 30%, if they move forward and terminate, it's half the time you'll end up with some sort of maternal illness. And like I say, those illnesses, they can also cause infertility by scarring and, jeopardizing future pregnancies.
Sounds like a delicate decision because, there's a chance in those numbers, right? There's a chance you're going to be okay. There's a chance the fetus is going to be okay. But it definitely feels like a roll of the dice.
Very much so. And that roll of the dice does not come without, shall we say, significant impact to your life.
What kind of legal guidance did you and other doctors get about what to do in a situation like this?
Basically, we can't take care of them if we suspect they're starting to get sick. The care we can't give is, shall we say, emptying the uterus. When you have an infection in the uterus, not only are antibiotics important, but probably more important is draining any sort of infected material out of a body, just like lancing a wound or something.
Because that would be an abortion.
Yes, if there's a heartbeat. And if there's still a heartbeat there, and mom's not actually in the threat of death, our legal counsel is like, we're not certain that that's, clear ground. And, these are the types of things that we're asking for clarification from our legislators. And they refuse to really put themselves out there and help us define what it is, that they feel is reasonable treatment.
What are the risks to a provider like you if you make I don't know, what some might call a bad call here? You intervene when a woman's health is at risk versus, I don't know, she's on the verge of death.
Well, right now we can lose our license. We can be sued by a family member. We can go to jail. Our laws here are really draconian around termination. And it's tough as a medical provider to trust that there's not going to be an attorney general or, a prosecutor who wants to make a name for themselves, by saving babies. And so I think that's where everybody walks around on eggshells.
You've mentioned in other reporting I've seen that you've had multiple patients who had to be airlifted out of state in order to get an abortion in the middle of a medical emergency.
Yes.
Can you describe one or more of those situations? How did it go down?
Well, I can think of a situation. Another not uncommon is high blood pressure or preeclampsia in pregnancy. Early onset, it can be very, very dangerous, if it's around 20 weeks or so. The chance of, getting a viable baby is really small, and there can be a lot of danger to mom. So, we get called in, hey, we've got a patient who has high blood pressure and maybe some abnormal laboratory values or things and it's pretty clear that if a woman continues, they're going to end up risking stroke and kidney damage or things like that. And even death somewhere along the line. And so you come in and like, hi, I'm the high-risk guy. I'm really sorry we're here. But here's the reality of what needs to happen. And so you've got a situation where, you're telling someone they're losing their baby for their own health, but yet, guess what? To get the treatment you need, you're going to have to go someplace else.
Can you take me inside that conversation? Because I've given birth a couple of times. I had preeclampsia in one of those pregnancies. It's real stressful and tense.
Yes.
And I wasn't in medical crisis, but it was still intense. So if you or someone had come in when I was 20 weeks pregnant, I'm sorry I'm here, blah, 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 I think I would have ripped your head off. Like what?
Yes.
How does that go down?
I mean, we're the bad guy, and I think to acknowledge that, that's what you have to do, is acknowledge the fact that it's a double whammy. To take a situation where you're disappointed and it's a wanted pregnancy, and it comes out of nowhere to someone. I mean, you're sitting there and you can feel the pain. And then the next thing is I have to tell them that, you're going to have to go out of state for this treatment. You're probably going to be in a helicopter without your family, and they're going to have to figure out how to get, a place to stay, find you, find the facility, all those things are going on. And I'm sure they do want to rip my head off, but I it's not really about me. It's making sure that people stay safe, they get the adequate health care that they need.
I was reading about what some anti-abortion physicians have said about bans like Idaho's and how to deal with pregnancies that may be failing. And at least one of them talked about it being possible not to perform an abortion, but to separate a mother and a fetus, essentially to deliver the baby, even if it's very early on, in case the fetus can survive. What would you say to a physician who suggests that kind of course of action?
I think that's a little bit selfish on that person's point of view, because if a mom gets all the facts, doesn't want to take the risks, etc., why should she be forced to try and do that,
Are there risks to delivering the baby instead of doing an abortion?
Let's say the risks are not necessarily death. At what point I think we get into this, okay, at what age is resuscitation really practical? And so I think to force someone into having a baby with extreme prematurity and small chances of survival, and virtually all will have, some sort of long-term deficits, I find that very hard from a moral standpoint to force a family into that.
And you'd have to make that decision very quickly when you're already under a lot of stress and in physical pain, probably.
Yeah, and rightfully so. People are clinging to whatever they can have. I mean, it's like, do everything you can.
You're saying it offers false hope.
Yeah. I have had women with babies with pretty severe, maybe syndromic abnormalities of their babies, and they go ahead and carry the baby. And I've actually had a couple people come back and say, if I had realized how difficult this journey was with this baby, I would have more seriously considered terminating.
Wow.
And I know there are families that do get joy out of still having their children, but I think to try and help people understand what the journey might be is really important, and I think they need to have some choice around that.
We'll be right back after a quick break.
This episode is brought to you by SAP. First, the bad news. SAP Business AI will not help you generate cubist versions of your family's holiday photos, but it will help you understand which supplier is best to help you roll out your plant-based packaging in Southeast Asia, or identify the training your junior project manager needs to rise up the ranks, or automate repetitive tasks while you focus on big innovations. So you can be ready for the next opportunity. Revolutionary technology, real-world results. That's SAP Business AI.
This episode is brought to you by Shopify. Whether you're selling a little or a lot, Shopify helps you do your thing, however you cha-ching. From the launch your online shop stage, all the way to the we just hit 1 million orders stage. No matter what stage you're in, Shopify's there to help you grow. Sign up for a $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/special offer, all lowercase. That's shopify.com/special offer.
How closely did you follow the Supreme Court's oral arguments in this case about EMTALA and Idaho's law?
Pretty close.
Most of the conservatives seem skeptical that the federal government had a right to dictate care for women, it seemed to me. But Amy Coney Barrett, who's given birth 5 times, she asked some pretty pointed questions about whether a doctor could intervene and offer abortion if a woman's health was at risk. Did you note that too?
I did.
What'd you make of it?
I guess I would say I was impressed that she was actually asking some of those questions. Sometimes I feel, I feel like the Supreme Court has these foregone conclusions, and it felt like they were trying to get kind of to the bottom of, what the law was really saying.
If the court ruled in favor of the federal government, says the state has to allow hospitals to intervene when a woman's health is at risk, what would that actually mean for you?
I think for us, it would mean that we can at least treat patients who come in emergency situations such as severe high blood pressure or, the ruptured membranes or those types of things. We can take care of them here in their community with their family without, all of the extra hoops that we feel like are in front of us to provide that kind of care.
I sort of wonder if you would feel fully protected, even if the court did rule in favor of abortion care for women. And I say that because the rules in Idaho, there are just so many of them. There are rules about putting the doctor in prison, you can be sued, all these sorts of things. So I'm like, how does that impact what the legislature's done?
I think it's a brick, what I was saying, a brick in creating a path back to where we need to go. That's that. I wish it was enough, but it's not enough. And yes, this is still going to hang over our heads for a long time. And the whole EMTALA thing will be, I feel it will be, you can tell I'm at a loss for words because I don't know how I'm going to feel. And I want to be hopeful, but I know I can't put all my eggs in one basket. And this is definitely not the basket.
Yeah, you're at that point of knowing, like, you're not knowing when the relief will come. Like, will you feel relieved? Sounds like you're not sure.
No, I won't feel relieved. And the overall issue is bigger than just this particular question.
Again, this conversation was taped before the Supreme Court ruled. And just to reiterate, what they wound up deciding was more ambiguous than yes or no. Their decision dismisses this case, but doesn't say anything about its merits. So it's quite possible we'll see a case like this again, maybe as soon as next year. That means Dr. Seyb is still doing his job in limbo. One of the things that a lot of people have noted has happened in the years since the Dobbs decision is that a whole lot of doctors have left Idaho. It sounds like you don't want to. You're not going to do that. But you certainly know doctors who've left.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And truthfully, I think it's some of our general OBGYNs who are feeling more threatened. You know, we deal with pregnancy loss all the time. I mean, it's part of the natural reproductive process. And, you know, I mean, we've taken a maternal mortality rate, you know, a century ago that was many hundreds per 100,000, and now we're down to 20 to 40. And it's through the ability to do many of these procedures that does save women's lives.
Is it safe to have a baby in Idaho right now?
Well, you know, I guess it comes back to that thing. Risk and safety are in the eye of the beholder. I wouldn't discourage people from having kids or, you know, being pregnant, but I also really understand the fear that they might have, you know. I'll tell you probably right now, one of the biggest issues is access, because we've lost a lot of docs. We can't get people to apply. That's where I would be most worried if I needed to have a baby in Idaho is...
Who's going to catch it?
There's not enough providers. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, some have gone so far as to basically say the whole system of OBGYNs in your state is essentially collapsing. Would you agree with that?
It's on the verge of it, yes.
If a doctor called you tomorrow and said, hey, I'm thinking of moving to Idaho to be a obstetrician or a maternal-fetal medicine specialist, what would you tell them?
Please come. You know, how I look at it is things aren't optimal, but we are finding our way to work with it. And I do feel like the pendulum will be swinging back. I think the whole country was blindsided by the Dobbs decision. And I think that as things kind of swing back towards the middle, we will be in a place where we can do our jobs and live our lives without fear.
You're an optimist.
I am. You gotta be. You know? Otherwise, you just lay in bed and pull covers over your head, you know?
Dr. Seyb, I'm really grateful for your time. Thanks for coming on the show.
Absolutely.
Dr. Stacy Seyb is a maternal-fetal medicine specialist in Boise, Idaho. And that's our show. What Next is produced by Paige Osburn, Elena Schwartz, Rob Gunther, Madeline Ducharme, and Anna Phillips. We are led by Alicia Montgomery with a little boost from Susan Matthews. Ben Richmond is the Senior Director of Podcast Operations here at Slate. And I'm Mary Harris. Thanks for listening. Catch you back here next time.
Lucky Land Casino, asking people, what's the weirdest place you've gotten lucky?
Lucky? In line at the deli, I guess?
Aha, in my dentist's office. More than once, actually.
Do I have to say?
Yes, you do.
In the car before my kids' PTA meeting.
Really?
Yes.
Excuse me, what's the weirdest place you've gotten lucky?
I never win and tell.
Well, there you have it. You can get lucky anywhere, playing at LuckyLandSlots.com. Play for free right now. Are you feeling lucky? No purchase necessary. Void where prohibited by law. 18+. Terms and conditions apply. See website for details.